back after a short break. The next speaker today will be Agnieszka Mesterhazy, applied psychology student, who will be presenting her presentation, which is titled How to Stay in Touch with Life, the Idea of Self-Concept.
Good afternoon. Today I would like to focus on the topic of how to stay in touch with life, the idea of self-concept. Today's reality encourages us to be the man of one's own potential, to strive for the desire to succeed, to be determined, and to seek our opportunities. Today's reality makes us believe that we need to strive to realize our potential, that we are desired to realize the potential. I would like to ask you a question that I would want you to think about throughout the whole presentation. The question is, how to stay in touch with life, with its fast pace, and how realizing one's own self-concept is so important to not get lost with oneself and not to be detached from oneself. Today's reality actually encourages us to live to eat instead of eat to live. But to answer the question, I will try to define what self-concept actually is. Self-concept is the way I perceive, think about, and value myself. Self-concept is the opinions, the attitudes, the behaviors that I hold to be true about my life. But some concepts and some beliefs are not real, are illusions. And that's how we create a destructive self-concept. Like for instance, in the case of anorexia, when the girls or boys think that they're very fat, but in reality they're very skinny. But that's the self-concept that they created of themselves, an unrealistic self-concept of themselves. So, to actually describe what self-concept is, I need to define to you its main three components, which are self-image, self-esteem, and ideal self. I will try to shortly characterize each one of them to you so it's more clear what I'm going to talk about for the 10 minutes of my presentation. So to start, self-image. Self-image is the view that I have of myself. Self-image can be like self-concept. It can be realistic or unrealistic. It can be true and it can be a lie. Self-image can be conditioned by parental influences, friendships, relationships, what they think about me, what they say about me. So to better understand what self-image is, I would like to move on to Kuhn's 20 statements test, in which he asked people around the question, who am I? So he discovered that there are 4 major types of responses. First, physical descriptions. I'm a woman. I'm a man. I'm a child. Then social roles. I'm a mother. I'm a student. I'm a doctor. Social roles are important because they actually help us determine how we act in various situations. They help us stereotypically think how we should act being in a new situation, in a different situation. Then we have personal traits. Personal traits answer the question, for example, or the description, I'm humorous, I'm funny, I'm ambitious. And then existential statements, I'm a human being. It's actually very interesting that younger people tend to describe themselves in personal traits, whereas older people describe themselves in social roles. Self-image has an extensive impact on self-esteem. Self-esteem answers the question how do I value myself? We can either evaluate ourselves in a positive or negative way. For instance, I'm not worth it. I don't like myself. I don't like how I look. I don't deserve to succeed. That's the perfect influence that low and negative view of myself plays on my life and how it leads to a negative and low self-esteem. Positive view of myself advantages to high self-esteem. Positive view is based on the ground of appreciation, loving and caring about myself and accepting myself. There are 4 factors that actually influence self-esteem, and they were characterized by Argyle in 2008. First, the reaction of others, whether people accept us, appreciate us, or avoid us and criticize us. Then comparison with others. People compare ourselves to people more successful, more accomplished, and that makes them unsatisfied and that makes them feel bad about themselves. Or they compare themselves with people less successful, which actually makes them feel and makes them create an illusion that they're doing better, that they are better, that they succeed more. There was this experiment with Mr. Clean and Mr. Dirty, where people were waiting in a room for a job interview. And one group of them was seated with a person, Mr. Dirty, who wasn't looking that good, who wasn't that determined, who didn't really strive to succeed. And when they were asked right before the interview, when they were asked how do they feel, their self-esteem was very high because they compared themselves to a person that was less successful than they were. And then their next group was seated with Mr. Clean, who looked businesslike, elegant-like, who was very self-efficient, was very self-accepting, and self-confident. And people asked how do they feel right before the interview, their self-esteem actually tended to drop. Next, we have social roles as the third factor that can influence self-esteem. And social roles, some may carry prestige and some may carry stigma. For instance, social roles, prestigious social roles like being a musician, being a teacher, being a lawyer, a doctor. These roles carry positive self-esteem. And roles that carry stigma, such as being a prisoner, I'm sure that none of us would want to be a prisoner because that's obviously low self-esteem related. And then last factor is identification, which is the last but most important factor of self-esteem because it creates the sense of self-esteem. It gives us the feeling of being rooted in the positions we occupy, in the roles we play, and in friendships that we are in. Moving on, I would like to state a question. Do I like myself? Do I like where I am with my life right now? And who would I really would like to become in the future? The last question refers to the ideal self. Ideal self is strongly connected to self-image. You may wonder how. Well, when there is a mismatch between self-image, the way I perceive myself right now, who am I? Where am I? Do I like the position that I'm in right now? And when there's a mismatch between self-image and ideal self, so the self that I would want to become, that's when the state of incongruence is formed. The state in which I experience such feelings as depression, sadness, frustration, and when I cannot self-actualize. But what happens when these states of self-image and ideal self are similar or consistent? That's when the congruency state or form appears, and that's when I can actually self-actualize and realize my potential. So to sum up, the realization of self-concept is important because it gives us motivation for daily behaviors. It gives us motivation to wake up every day, to actually go to work, go to school, or to maintain our daily activities. It actually gives rise to all possible selves, and the possible selves, they give the motivation to develop one's potential. The same exact potential I was telling you about in the beginning of my presentation. So, to answer the question of how to stay in touch with life, well, to stay in touch with life is to stay in touch with one's self-concept, to be aware of oneself. You may wonder how to maintain a healthy self-concept, how to preserve healthy self-concept. Well, get to know yourself, know your strengths, and know your weaknesses. Know that even though maybe you're sometimes not in the best situation in your life, know that you can develop and improve. Give yourself a metaphorical handshake and, tell yourself that you're doing good, that you're a good person, and that you will do better later on. Be true to who you are. Being honest with yourself actually tends to make you feel what you need, what you desire, what your dreams and goals are. And third, be responsible for your choices, because the experience that you gain, it's what makes you you. It's what makes you unique. And then last is love and accept yourself. It may sound cliche and very simple, but we tend to forget about loving and accepting oneself. And it's important because that actually helps us to define ourselves. It actually helps us to improve ourselves. And it actually helps us to eat to live instead of live to eat. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. That was Agnieszka Mesterhazy with How to Stay in Touch with Life, the idea of self-concept.